The morning sun came through the kitchen window and fell on the old wooden table where Daniel Carter sat with his coffee. He was 57 years old now, with gray hair and tired eyes that had seen too much of the galaxy. His hands, once steady on the controls of rescue ships, now spent their days fixing fences and feeding chickens on a small farm in Northern California. His wife, Grace, came into the kitchen with an envelope in her hand. It was not a normal envelope. It was silver and smooth, made from a material that did not exist on Earth. The seal on the back showed the symbol of the Galactic Assembly. "This came for you," Grace said. She placed it on the table in front of him. Daniel looked at it for a long moment. He had not received anything from the Assembly in over 20 years. After he retired from the Human Galactic Aid Corps, he had tried very hard to forget that part of his life. The things he saw during those years still visited him in his dreams sometimes. He opened the envelope slowly. Inside was a single sheet of paper, thin as light but strong as metal. The words were written in both English and the common galactic language. "Dear Mr. Daniel Carter," he read aloud, "you are invited to attend the 30th anniversary ceremony of the Kethran Relief Mission. The Galactic Assembly wishes to honor all humans who participated in this historic act of mercy. Your presence would bring great honor to this event." Grace sat down across from him. "The Kethran mission," she said softly. "You never talk about that one." Daniel put the letter down. His coffee had gone cold, but he did not notice. His mind had traveled back 30 years, to a burning colony on a world whose name he could barely remember. He remembered the smoke that blocked out the stars. He remembered the screams that filled his radio. He remembered flying his ship through fire and ash while his instruments screamed warnings at him. "It was a bad one," he said finally. "The Kethran raiders hit a civilian colony. Thousands of people. The Valari people. They were peaceful. They had no weapons, no defenses. The raiders killed them for sport." Grace reached across the table and took his hand. She had been married to him for 32 years. She knew when to speak and when to stay silent. "We got there too late to save most of them," Daniel continued. "But we pulled out as many as we could, flew them to safety, gave them food and medicine." He paused. "I must have carried 100 people onto my ship that day. Maybe more. I stopped counting after a while. And now they want to thank you for it," Grace said. Daniel shook his head. "I don't need thanks. I was just doing my job. Any decent person would have done the same thing." But even as he said the words, a memory came to him. It was sharper than the others, more clear. He was running through the ruins of a building that had collapsed. Fire was everywhere. The heat was so strong that it hurt to breathe. His scanner showed a life sign somewhere ahead, weak but still there. He found her under a pile of broken stone. A child. She could not have been more than 7 years old. Her skin was pale blue, like all Valari, and her eyes were silver, wide with fear and pain. She was trapped, and the fire was getting closer. Daniel did not think. He just acted. He pulled the stones away with his bare hands until his gloves tore and his fingers bled. When he finally freed her, she was barely conscious. Her clothes were burned. Her body was covered in ash and wounds. He took off his flight jacket and wrapped it around her small body. Then he lifted her in his arms and ran. The building was falling apart around them. Pieces of the ceiling crashed down just steps behind him. But he kept running until he reached the open air, until he reached his ship, until he placed her gently on a medical bed. She looked up at him with those silver eyes. She was crying without sound, too weak to make noise. Daniel leaned down close to her and spoke softly. "You're going to be okay, little one," he said. "I promise." He did not know if she understood him. He did not know if she could even hear him. But he made the promise anyway, because it was all he could give her in that moment. That was 30 years ago. Daniel had not thought about that child in a very long time. He wondered sometimes what had happened to her, if she had survived, if she had found a new family. But he never tried to find out. There were too many faces from those days, too many children he had carried out of fire and ruin. If he tried to remember them all, he would never be able to sleep again. "You should go," Grace said, pulling him back to the present. Daniel looked at her. "Why? It's just a ceremony. Speeches and medals and politicians shaking hands." "Because it matters," Grace said. "Maybe not to you, but to them, to the people you saved. They want to see your face. They want to say thank you." Daniel was quiet for a long time. He looked out the window at the green hills and the blue sky. Earth was so peaceful now, so far from the burning colonies and dying worlds that haunted his memories. "All right," he said finally. "I'll go." Grace smiled and squeezed his hand. "I'll come with you. Someone has to make sure you wear a clean shirt." Daniel laughed for the first time that morning. It felt good to laugh. It pushed away the shadows in his mind, at least for a little while. Far away, on a space station that floated in the darkness between stars, a woman named Sayla Voran stood in her office and read a report on her screen. She was an ambassador now, one of the most respected voices in the Galactic Assembly. Her pale blue skin and silver eyes marked her as Valari, one of the survivors of the Kethron massacre. The report contained a list of names, humans who would attend the anniversary ceremony. Sayla had read this list every year for 30 years, hoping to find one name. And every year, she had been disappointed, but not this year. Her hands trembled as she read the name on the screen. Daniel Carter, rescue pilot, retired. She closed her eyes and pressed her hand against her chest. Under her formal robes, she could feel the old fabric of a human flight jacket, worn and faded but still carefully preserved. She had carried it with her for 30 years, across dozens of worlds, through wars and peace talks and everything in between. The human who saved her life was coming. After 30 years of searching, she would finally see his face again. Sayla opened her eyes and looked out at the stars. "I found you," she whispered. "I finally found you." The Galactic Assembly Station was the largest structure Daniel had ever seen. It hung in space like a city made of light, with towers and domes that stretched in every direction. Ships of all sizes moved around it like fish swimming around a reef. Some were small shuttles. Others were massive cruisers that could carry thousands of beings. Daniel stood at the window of his transport ship and watched as they approached. Grace stood beside him, her hand in his. "It's beautiful," she said. Daniel nodded, but he did not feel the wonder that he should have felt. Instead, he felt small and out of place. He was just a farmer now, a man who fixed fences and fed chickens. He did not belong in a place like this. The transport docked at one of the station's many ports. When the doors opened, Daniel and Grace stepped out into a wide corridor filled with beings from dozens of different species. There were tall ones and short ones, ones with fur and ones with scales, ones that walked on two legs and ones that floated through the air. A young human woman in a formal uniform met them at the gate. Her name tag said, Lisa Morgan, Protocol Officer. "Mr. and Mrs. Carter," she said with a warm smile. "Welcome to the assembly station. We're so honored to have you here. Please follow me to your quarters." They walked through corridors that seemed to go on forever. Daniel noticed that many of the aliens they passed stopped to look at them. Some of them whispered to each other. A few of them actually pointed. "Why are they staring?" Daniel asked quietly. Lisa glanced back at him. "You're human, sir. And this is the anniversary of the Kethron mission. Humans are, well, let's just say you have a lot of admirers here." Daniel did not know what to say to that. He had never thought of himself as someone worth admiring. He was just a pilot who had done his job. Their quarters were larger than Daniel's entire farmhouse. The walls were made of some kind of crystal that glowed with soft light. The bed was big enough for 6 people. A window that covered an entire wall showed a view of the stars that took his breath away. "The ceremony is tomorrow evening," Lisa said. "Tonight there's a reception for all the human veterans. You'll meet the other survivors of the mission. Many of them have been looking forward to seeing you again." After she left, Daniel sat on the edge of the bed and put his head in his hands. "I shouldn't have come," he said. Grace sat beside him. "Why do you say that?" "Because I'm not what they think I am. I'm not a hero. I'm just a man who got lucky enough to survive." Grace was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Do you remember what you told me on our first date? You said that being a hero isn't about being brave. It's about being scared and doing the right thing anyway." Daniel looked at her. "I said that?" "You did. And I fell in love with you right then." She touched his face gently. "Whatever you think you are, Daniel Carter, you are a hero to someone. Maybe many someones. Let them thank you. Let them have this moment." In another part of the station, Sailor Varan stood in front of a mirror and tried to control her breathing. She had given speeches to thousands of beings. She had negotiated treaties that ended wars. She had faced down enemies who wanted her dead, but she had never been this nervous. Tomorrow, she would give the keynote speech at the ceremony. And somewhere in that audience, Daniel Carter would be listening. The man who had pulled her from the fire. The man who had promised her that she would be okay. Sayla closed her eyes and let the memories come. She was 7 years old again. The world was burning. Her mother had pushed her into a small space under the floor and told her to stay hidden. Sayla had heard the raiders come into their home. She had heard her mother scream. Then silence. She stayed hidden for hours, too scared to move. But the fire found her anyway. It ate through the floor above her and filled her hiding space with smoke. The ceiling collapsed and trapped her under broken stones. She could not breathe. She could not move. She was going to die. Then he came. She did not know where he came from. One moment there was only fire and pain. The next moment there was a face looking down at her. A strange face, with pale skin and no scales, with eyes that were brown like earth instead of silver like stars. He spoke to her in a language she did not understand. But his voice was kind. His hands were gentle as he pulled away the stones. When he lifted her in his arms, she felt something she had not felt since her mother died. She felt safe. He wrapped something around her body. It was warm and soft, and it smelled like him. Later, she learned it was called a jacket. She kept that jacket for 30 years. She was wearing it now under her formal robes, pressed against her heart. The last thing she remembered before losing consciousness was his voice. Soft and steady, speaking words she did not understand. Years later, when she learned English, she translated those words from her memory. "You're going to be okay, little one. I promise." And she was okay. She survived. A Valari family adopted her and raised her as their own. She went to school. She worked hard. She became an ambassador. And through all of it, she never stopped looking for the human who saved her. She had searched through thousands of records. She had asked hundreds of questions. She had followed dozens of leads that went nowhere. But she never gave up. Because she needed to find him. She needed to look into his eyes and say the words she had carried in her heart for 30 years. Thank you. Tomorrow, she would finally have her chance. Sayla opened her eyes and looked at herself in the mirror. She was not a scared child anymore. She was a respected ambassador, a survivor, a voice for her people. But inside, she was still that little girl in the fire, waiting for someone to save her. She touched the jacket under her robes and whispered a promise of her own. "Tomorrow, she said. "Tomorrow I will find the words." Outside her window, the stars burned bright and cold, witnesses to a story that had waited 30 years to be told. The Grand Hall of the Galactic Assembly was the most impressive room Daniel had ever seen. It was round and vast, with seats rising up in circles like the inside of a bowl. Thousands of beings filled those seats, representatives from every species in the known galaxy. Above them, a dome of clear crystal showed the stars in all their glory. Daniel sat in the front row with the other human veterans of the Kethran mission. There were about 40 of them, men and women who had grown old together in their memories of that terrible day. Some of them Daniel recognized. Most of them he did not. 30 years was a long time, and faces changed. Grace sat beside him, holding his hand. She could feel how tense he was, how much he wanted to be anywhere but here. High Counselor Dren Mareth walked to the podium at the center of the hall. He was a tall being with green skin and 6 arms, each one moving with careful grace as he spoke. "We are gathered here today to honor a moment in our shared history," the High Counselor said. His voice was deep and carried to every corner of the vast hall. 30 years ago, the Kethran raiders attacked a peaceful Velari colony. Thousands of innocent beings died in fire and violence. It was one of the darkest days our galaxy has ever known. Daniel looked down at his hands. He remembered that darkness. He remembered how helpless he had felt, how small against the scale of the destruction. But from that darkness came a light. The High Counselor continued. The humans came. They were young to our galaxy then, newcomers who many of us viewed with suspicion and fear. We thought they were primitive. We thought they were violent. We thought they had nothing to offer the civilized species of the Assembly. The High Counselor paused and looked at the row of human veterans. We were wrong. A murmur went through the crowd. Daniel felt Grace squeeze his hand. The humans flew into the fire, the High Counselor said. They carried our wounded on their backs. They gave their food to our hungry and their medicine to our sick. They asked for nothing in return. They simply helped, because helping was the right thing to do. The High Counselor raised 2 of his hands toward the human veterans. Today, we honor these humans and their sacrifice. But first, I would like to introduce the keynote speaker. She is a survivor of the Kethran massacre, a child who was saved by human hands. She has become one of the most respected voices in our assembly. Please welcome Ambassador Sayla Varan. The crowd applauded as a figure walked to the podium. Daniel watched her approach, curious to see the person who would speak about a day he had tried so hard to forget. Sayla Varan was beautiful in the way that all Velari were beautiful, with pale blue skin and silver eyes that seemed to hold starlight inside them. She wore formal robes of deep purple, and she moved with quiet dignity as she took her place at the podium. But Daniel noticed that her hands were shaking. "Thank you, High Counselor," Sayla said. Her voice was soft but clear, carried by the hall's perfect acoustics to every ear. "And thank you all for being here today." She paused and looked out at the crowd. For a moment, her silver eyes seemed to move across the row of human veterans. Then she began to speak. "I was 7 years old when the Kethran raiders came to my world. I lived in a small house with my mother and father. We were not important people. We were not wealthy or powerful. We were just a family, living a quiet life under quiet stars." Her voice trembled slightly, but she continued. "The raiders came at night. They killed without mercy, without reason. They burned our homes and laughed at our screams. My mother hid me under the floor and told me to stay silent. I heard them kill her. I heard everything. The hall was completely silent. Thousands of beings held their breath. The fire found me anyway. The ceiling collapsed and trapped me. I was dying. I was 7 years old, and I was dying alone in the dark." Sayla's hands gripped the podium. Her silver eyes glistened with tears she was fighting to hold back. Then he came. Daniel felt something strange in his chest. A cold feeling, like ice spreading through his heart. A human, Sayla said. A pilot. He came out of nowhere, running through the fire like it could not hurt him. He pulled the stones away with his bare hands. His gloves tore. His fingers bled. But he did not stop until I was free. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. The ice in his chest was spreading, making it hard to breathe. He wrapped me in his jacket. He lifted me in his arms. He carried me through the burning ruins of my world, through smoke and ash and falling debris. And when he put me on his ship, when he laid me down on a bed and looked into my eyes, he made me a promise. Sayla's voice broke. Tears streamed down her blue cheeks. He said, "You're going to be okay, little one. I promise." The hall was silent. No one moved. No one breathed. He did not know me, Sayla said. He did not speak my language. He had no reason to risk his life for a child who was not his species, not his concern, not his responsibility. She lifted her head and looked directly at the row of human veterans, but he came anyway. Daniel felt Grace's hand tighten on his. He felt the eyes of thousands of beings turning toward him, but he could not move. He could only stare at the woman on the podium, at her silver eyes that were scanning the human faces, searching for something, searching for someone. For 30 years, Sayla said, I have looked for that human. I have searched through records and databases. I have asked questions in every corner of the galaxy. I never stopped looking, because I needed to find him. I needed to look into his eyes and say the words I have carried in my heart since I was 7 years old. Her eyes stopped moving. They locked onto Daniel's face, and in that moment, Daniel knew. The little girl. The silver eyes. The jacket he had wrapped around her small body. She was standing right in front of him. I found him, Sayla whispered into the silence of the hall. After 30 years, I finally found him. And she stepped away from the podium and began to walk toward Daniel Carter. The grand hall held thousands of beings, but not one of them made a sound. The silence was so deep that Daniel could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. He could hear the soft footsteps of Sayla Varan as she walked down from the podium, her silver eyes fixed on his face. He wanted to stand. He wanted to run. He wanted to be anywhere but here, in front of all these eyes, with all these memories crashing over him like waves. But his legs would not move. His body had turned to stone. Sayla stopped in front of him. She was close enough now that he could see the tears on her blue cheeks, the way her hands trembled at her sides, the faint scars on her neck that had never fully healed. She looked at him, and he looked at her, and 30 years disappeared like smoke. He remembered her, the little girl with silver eyes, covered in ash and blood. The child he had pulled from the fire, the one who had been so small and so broken that he was sure she would not survive. He had carried her onto his ship and handed her to the medical team, and then he had gone back into the burning colony to find more survivors. He never learned her name. He never knew what happened to her. She was one face among hundreds, one life among thousands. He had tried not to think about her, because thinking about her meant thinking about all the others, the ones he could not save. But she had thought about him. For 30 years, she had carried his memory in her heart. It's you, Sayla whispered. Her voice was barely a breath. I knew your face the moment I saw you. I have seen it in my dreams for 30 years. Daniel opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. What could he possibly say? What words existed for a moment like this? Sayla reached up and touched the edge of her formal robes. Slowly, carefully, she pulled them aside to reveal what she wore underneath. It was his jacket. The old flight jacket he had wrapped around her 30 years ago. It was worn and faded now, patched in places where the fabric had torn. but the name was still visible, stitched in thread that had once been bright gold. D. Carter. Daniel felt something break inside him. A wall he had built a long time ago, a wall made of silence and forgetting. The wall crumbled, and everything he had held behind it came flooding out. His eyes filled with tears. "You kept it," he said. His voice was rough, broken. "All this time, you kept it." "I never took it off," Selah said. "Not really. Even when I couldn't wear it, I kept it close to me. It was all I had of you. All I had of the human who saved my life." She looked at him with those silver eyes, and then she did something that made every being in the hall gasp. She knelt before him. In Valari culture, kneeling before another person was the highest form of respect. It was reserved for parents, for teachers, for those who had given the gift of life itself. No Valari knelt before an outsider. No Valari knelt before an alien species. But Selah Varan knelt before Daniel Carter. "I have spent 30 years looking for you," she said. Her voice echoed through the silent hall. "I became an ambassador so I could travel the galaxy, so I could search every world for the human who pulled me from the fire. Everything I am, everything I have done, exists because of you." Daniel shook his head. The tears were falling freely now, and he did not try to stop them. "I didn't do anything special," he said. "I just did my job. Anyone would have done the same." Selah looked up at him. A small smile touched her lips, sad and beautiful at the same time. "No," she said, "they would not. The galaxy watched my people burn, and they did nothing. They said it was not their concern. They said it was too dangerous. They said the Valari were not worth the risk." Her voice grew stronger, filling the hall. "But the humans came. You came. You flew into the fire when everyone else flew away. You bled for strangers. You risked everything for people who were not your species, not your responsibility, not your concern." She reached out and took his hands in hers. Her skin was cool and smooth, her grip surprisingly strong. "You asked for nothing in return. You did not even stay to learn our names. You simply helped, and then you left, as if saving lives was just another day of work." Daniel tried to speak, but she continued. "That is what makes you different. That is what makes humans different. You do not help because you want something. You do not help because you expect to be thanked. You help because you cannot stand by and watch others suffer. It is written in your bones. It is part of your soul." The hall was still silent, but Daniel could feel the weight of thousands of eyes on him, not judging, not demanding, just watching, witnessing this moment that would be remembered for generations. Selah lifted his hands to her forehead, another gesture of deep Valari respect. "You promised me I would be okay," she said, "and you kept that promise. I am okay. I survived. I grew up. I became someone who could make a difference in this galaxy." She looked up at him, her silver eyes shining. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you for saving me. Thank you for giving me a chance to live. Thank you for being the human you are." Daniel could not speak. The tears were flowing too fast, the emotions too strong. He had spent 30 years trying to forget that day, trying to bury the memories of fire and death. He had told himself that what he did was nothing special, that he was just doing his job, that he did not deserve any recognition. But this woman, this child he had saved, had spent 30 years looking for him. She had carried his jacket against her heart. She had become an ambassador so she could find him. He reached down and gently lifted her to her feet, just as he had lifted her from the rubble 30 years ago, just as he had carried her through the fire. "You don't need to kneel," he said. His voice was thick with tears. "You don't need to thank me. Seeing you alive, seeing what you've become, that's all the thanks I will ever need." He pulled her into his arms and held her close. She buried her face against his shoulder and cried. 30 years of gratitude and grief and love pouring out of her in waves. The grand hall of the Galactic Assembly remained silent. But it was not the silence of emptiness. It was the silence of reverence, of witnessing something sacred. A human and a Velari, holding each other in the light of 1,000 stars. A promise made in fire, finally fulfilled in peace. And somewhere in that silence, the galaxy began to understand what humans truly were. The ceremony ended, but the night was far from over. The grand hall slowly emptied as beings from across the galaxy filed out, speaking in quiet voices about what they had witnessed. Many of them looked back at Daniel Carter as they left, their eyes filled with a new kind of respect. But Daniel did not notice them. He was sitting in a small private room with Grace on one side and Scylla on the other. Someone had brought them tea, but the cup sat untouched on the table. There were too many words that needed to be said, too many years that needed to be bridged. "I looked for you," Scylla said. "Every year, I requested the attendance list for the anniversary ceremony. Every year, I searched for your name, but you never came." Daniel looked down at his hands. "I tried to forget," he admitted. "The things I saw that day, I couldn't carry them with me. I had to put them down somewhere and walk away." "I understand," Scylla said softly. "The survivors of the massacre, we all cope in different ways. Some of us remember. Some of us forget. Neither way is wrong." Grace reached over and took Daniel's hand. "He never talked about it," she said to Scylla. "In 32 years of marriage, he mentioned the Catherine mission maybe 3 times. I knew it haunted him. I just didn't know how much." Scylla nodded. "The humans who came to save us, they saw things no being should ever see. Children burned beyond recognition. Families torn apart. An entire world dying in front of their eyes." She paused. "And yet, they stayed. They kept working, kept saving, kept giving. Long after any reasonable person would have given up." She looked at Daniel with those silver eyes, and he saw something in them he had not expected. Not just gratitude. Understanding. "You are not just heroes," Scylla said. "You are survivors too. The mission wounded you in ways the galaxy never recognized. And for that, I am sorry." Daniel shook his head. "You have nothing to apologize for. You were a child. You were the victim." "I was just what?" Scylla asked. "Just a pilot doing his job? Just a man who happened to be in the right place at the right time?" She smiled sadly. "I have heard those words before. I have heard them from every human veteran I have ever met. You all say the same thing. You all refuse to see yourselves as heroes." She stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the stars burned in the darkness, countless points of light in an endless void. "When I was growing up," she said, "the galaxy had a very specific view of humans. They thought you were dangerous, violent, unpredictable. They pointed to your history of wars and conflicts as proof that you could not be trusted." She turned back to face them. "The Kethran relief mission changed that. When the galaxy watched your people fly into the fire, when they saw you carrying wounded strangers on your backs, when they witnessed you giving your food and medicine to dying children, something shifted. The fear began to fade. Trust began to grow." She walked back to the table and sat down across from Daniel. "My testimony helped secure humanity's membership in the Galactic Assembly," she said. "I told them what you did for me. I told them about the jacket, the promise, the way you looked at me when you carried me through the flames. I told them that if this was what humans were capable of, then the galaxy needed more humans, not fewer." Daniel stared at her. "I had no idea. I never knew any of this. How could you?" Scylla asked. "You went home. You tried to forget. You raised your chickens and fixed your fences and lived a quiet life with your wonderful wife." She glanced at Grace with a warm smile. You did not ask for fame or recognition. You simply moved on. That's Daniel, Grace said. He does the right thing and then acts like it was nothing. He's been that way since the day I met him. Sayla reached into her robes and pulled out the old flight jacket. She held it in her hands for a long moment, looking at the worn fabric, the faded name, the patches that held it together. This jacket saved my life twice, she said. Once when you wrapped it around me in the fire, and again when I was 12 years old, struggling to find a reason to keep living. I would hold it at night and remember that somewhere in the galaxy, there was a human who thought I was worth saving. That knowledge kept me alive when nothing else could. She held the jacket out to Daniel. I want to return it to you, she said. It belongs with its owner. Daniel looked at the jacket, then at Sayla. He reached out and gently pushed it back toward her. Keep it, he said. It was never really mine. It was always meant to be yours. Sayla's eyes filled with fresh tears. I cannot accept this. It is too precious. You already accepted it, Daniel said. 30 years ago, when a scared pilot wrapped it around a dying child. I gave it to you then. I'm giving it to you again now. Keep it. Pass it on to your children someday. Let them know that when the galaxy was burning, somebody cared enough to help. Sayla clutched the jacket to her chest. The tears flowed freely down her blue cheeks, but she was smiling. My children will know your name, she said. Daniel Carter. The human who saved their mother. The human who changed the galaxy. She leaned forward and kissed his forehead, a gesture of profound love and respect in Valari culture. Thank you, she whispered. For everything? Later, when the station had grown quiet and most beings had retired to their quarters, Daniel and Grace stood on a private balcony overlooking the stars. Sayla had gone to rest, but not before making them promise to stay in touch, to visit her homeworld, to let her show them the memorial that had been built in honor of the human rescuers. Grace leaned against Daniel's shoulder. How do you feel? She asked. Daniel thought about the question for a long time. How did he feel? For 30 years, he had carried the weight of that day in silence. He had pushed the memories down, locked them away, refused to look at them. He had told himself that what he did was nothing special, that he was just one pilot among many, that he did not deserve to be remembered. But tonight, a woman had knelt before him in front of the entire galaxy. She had shown him his old jacket, worn for 30 years against her heart. She had told him that his small act of kindness had changed everything, for her people, for humanity itself. I feel... He started, then stopped. I feel like maybe I was wrong. About myself. About what I did. You were wrong, Grace said simply. You've always been wrong about that. Daniel laughed softly. You've been waiting 32 years to say that. I've been waiting 32 years for you to hear it. They stood together in silence, watching the stars. Somewhere out there, on 1,000 different worlds, beings were going to sleep with new thoughts about humanity. They were going to dream about the humans who flew into fire to save strangers. They were going to wake up with a little more hope, a little more trust, a little more faith in the goodness that existed in the universe. All because one pilot did his job. All because one child. Remember. Daniel took a deep breath and felt something he had not felt in 30 years. Peace. The memories were still there. The pain and the loss and the horror of that burning day. But they were lighter now. They did not crush him the way they used to. He had made a promise to a dying child, and he had kept it. She was okay. And finally, so was he.